To be the best, you have to learn from the best. Louisville and the surrounding regions are home to many of the most storied companies and innovative startups in the distilled spirits industry. And there's no better place to learn the business of the distilled spirits industry than from a university located in its epicenter. The University of Louisville has partnered with industry experts to offer the Distilled Spirits Business Certificate, a 6-course program designed to accelerate your success in this booming industry. Oh, and it's all online. Get signed up to make your next career move at uofl.me/bourbon pursuit. Michael Meyers.
Michael Meyers.
Got it.
We didn't want to say anything, but I'm sure you get it all the time. People are like, Michael Myers, especially down like Halloween coming up and stuff.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Never.
Never.
You're the one.
It's a
Day of my
first.
damn life. And my first name's Jason, believe it or not.
Are you shitting me?
Nope.
Oh, my gosh. This is episode 242 of Bourbon Pursuit. I'm Kenny, and if you're ready for your bourbon, whiskey, and overall spirits news, well, it's about time we get to it. According to the U.S. Securities Regulation charges in its 2014 and 2015 fiscal years, Diageo North America pressured distributors to buy excess inventory in order to meet internal sales targets in the face of declining markets, and now is hit with a $5 million fine from the SEC. Johnny Walker's owner Diageo failed to disclose the excess stocks to investors, creating a misleading impression that Diageo and Diageo North America were able to achieve their sales targets through normal customer demand, according to the SEC. Now, without admitting or denying the SEC's findings, Diageo has agreed to pay a $5 million penalty and agreed to cease and desist from any further violations. The SEC has accepted Diageo's offer. Lux Row Distillers is paying homage to the past by relaunching an old bourbon. The Davis County Kentucky Straight Bourbon is being released in 3 varieties. The mash bill is a mix of wheated bourbon and rye mash bills set to deliver a sweet and spicy taste. There will be the original, a Cabernet Sauvignon finish, and a French oak finish. Davis County Distilling Company was the first to release the bourbon, and the brand dates back to 1874 and was one of the few distilleries to survive Prohibition. Maker's Mark has added more than 500 solar panels to its facility in Loretto to power its rickhouses, and it's done through a partnership with the Kentucky Utilities Company. The 560 panels will provide energy for security, lighting barrel elevators, and office spaces in the rickhouses. However, I'm curious if there's actually office space at a rickhouse. If it's true, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, because if you've been sequestered to sitting in a rickhouse every day, it might get a little bit lonely. Almost like Milton and his red stapler in the basement from The Office Space. But I guess it smells like bourbon, which is better than a basement, so you got that going for you. All right, well, back to topic. The new solar array first began producing power for Maker's Mark in early February and is expected to produce about 268,000 kilowatt hours per year. E-commerce analytics company Profitero said that online alcohol sales could explode from anywhere to $7 to $15 billion in the next few years, noting that e-commerce is making an impact on just about every industry imaginable, and alcohol looks to be the next sector to be disrupted by the continued shift to digital. However, as we've been saying on this podcast time and time again, the 3-tier system is slowing this down and is dating the industry. In an article by BeverageDaily.com, it looks at platforms such as Drizzly, GoPuff, and Thirsty on how brands can catch on and partner. It also goes into detail on how these brands can differentiate themselves and not be paired next to other brands that could be either cheaper or delivered in a shorter time period. You can read more with the link to BeverageDaily.com in our show notes. Last week at the inaugural U.S. Distilled Spirits Conference, Mitch McConnell offered no relief with the ongoing tariff dispute for American and foreign whiskey. The European Union is a key market export for Kentucky bourbon, and it imposed 25% tariffs on U.S. whiskey in 2018 in response to U.S. tariffs that Trump enacted on imported steel and aluminum. Now, late last year, the U.S. slapped a 25% tariff on imports of single malt Irish and Scotch whiskey liqueurs, and that also affected global companies like Brown-Forman and Diageo that import these products to the U.S. Now, a common excuse is that the U.S. whiskey industry has just been collateral damage in Trump's trade disputes. And Chris Swanger, president and CEO of the Spirits Council, said that the industry hasn't lost hope and that the levies will be removed. And now there's even more coverage that the chief executives of the Scotch Whisky Association and the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States are calling on the UK and US governments to urgently find a negotiated solution to unrelated trade disputes and to remove all tariffs on distilled spirits. Now, have you ever wondered, why does whiskey taste like whiskey? Well, when we nose and taste bourbon, we get leather, caramel, and dried fruits, but it was never made with any of that. In a new article by Lou Bryson at the Daily Beast, he explores every step of the process and how flavors are derived, with grains like rye and their spiciness character. Why using the same mash bill at two different distilleries will result in two different very whiskeys. And then there's geosmin, an organic compound formed by bacteria that's found in water and in soil and is responsible for that musty or earthy smell like some lake water, but can also be found in whiskey too. There's more talk about stills, barrels, proofing, and more, and you can read all this with a link to the Daily Beast in our show notes. For today's podcast, Michael Meyers tells the story of the starting Distillery 291. He had a career in photography, and the events of 9/11 made him want to do something else. So like anything most of us want to venture into, you research and research and research. Michael actually built his very first still on a tight budget and ended up even using some of his photography equipment in the still itself. The distillery has grown, but that original still is used as his doubler today. From these humble beginnings, his whiskey has gone off to win many different awards, and now they're expanding into more and more states. The distillery is expanding itself, and he's creating a whiskey that is Aspen stave finished that he feels is authentic to Colorado. We're currently doing our 2020 Bourbon Pursuit audience survey, so we want to know more about you, our listeners. So if you've got 30 seconds to spare, please visit bourbonpursuit.com/2020 survey. And it only takes 30 seconds. We appreciate the time. All right, it's showtime. Here's Joe from Barrel Bourbon, and then you've got Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
It's Joe from Barrel Bourbon. In 2013, I launched Barrelcraft Spirits without a distillery and defied conventional wisdom. To this day, my team and I source and blend exceptional barrels from established producers and bottle at cask strength. Find out more at barrelbourbon.com.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. As I put the Bourye upon my lips for the first time, I could feel it tingling upon the bottom of my lip and the top. Once it hit my tongue, it just overwhelmed my palate with flavor, drenching down the bottom of my jawline, tingling the sides of my tongue, tingling the top of my palate, just warming me all the way down. And you know what? It's not a bourbon, and it's not a rye. It's a blend of straights. It's a blend of straight rye whiskey and straight bourbon, and it is motherfucking delicious. Right now, I'm putting it as one of my contenders for Whiskeys of the Year. You can see my full review on it on my YouTube page. But this whiskey and all the barrel releases and all these other blends that we have seen come out in recent years from High West and Barrel and numerous other blending houses that are really doing a great job right now. They really are shaking up our traditions in American whiskey. You see, the term blend used to be a really dirty word in American whiskey. And it all goes back to the 1800s when Canadian blenders were infiltrating the straight whiskey scene and undercutting the Kentucky bourbon distillers and putting their Canadian blends on the market. And you know what? Consumers really, really liked them. And so it begins there, and the Canadian whiskey distillers were trying to block the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897. Of course, they were unsuccessful. The Canadian whiskey distillers also rise up again after Prohibition, and they actually, ironically, tried to put Bottled and Bond on their label. Now, what's interesting is that the U.S. government ended up tariffing their whiskey to block them from using Bottled and Bond. So that basically stopped them from using Bottled and Bond. But at that same time, American distillers did not have a lot of stocks from their leftover from Prohibition. So they actually had to use blends themselves to get their brands out onto the market. And so you would see neutral grain spirit being added to, say, a 4-year-old bourbon that had just been distilled a few years ago. And that really kind of like people were like, oh, I don't really like blends, but this is all I got. And the straight bourbon distillers were just kind of reluctantly doing that, but they had to. And so you couple that, what they would later call rot gut whiskey, with the blended whiskey from Canada, and you had distillers in the 1950s not even allowing the word blend being used in their distilling house. And that's where the words mingle and marrying were born. And for every decade after that, the Kentucky distillers especially would call out blend as a dirty word and would not let people say putting 2 barrels together was blending. That was mingling. And so that's where those words come from, is because people were never wanted to use the word blend in Kentucky distilleries. Now, fast forward to 2020, you have a lot of new blood in the industry, a lot of new blood that does not care about old terms or old ways. They just want to put out great whiskey. And I got to tell you, some of the more exciting whiskeys that I have tasted in the past 5 years are blends of straight whiskeys. They are absolutely fantastic. But you will never, ever hear me say those words around the great Jimmy Russell. If you ask him, blend is still a dirty word. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, make sure you're checking out my new podcast, The Fred Minnick Show, where I interview musicians and I pair whiskeys to their palate. I'm having a blast, and coming up, I've got an American Idol winner on the show. Until next week, cheers.
Welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of Bourbon. Kenny and Ryan here in our official recording studio, which is deemed Kenny's basement.
Yes. Yeah, where we shoot everything. From Whiskey Quickies, the podcast, you name it.
Hey, but we're starting to get everything together. We got lights, we got cameras, we got everything happening here. So it's fun for especially people that are either watching on YouTube or on Facebook or something like that, and you want to get something different than just something audio only. You at least get a fancy background.
Yeah. Unfortunately for our guests, when they show up, they're like, damn it, what? You're in a house? I thought it was going to be like a recording studio. And like, there's going to be...
We'll get there one of these days.
One of these days.
One of these days we'll get there.
But it's much cooler to see all this whiskey, I'm sure. But
Well, we'll get the studio there one of these days. And we'll get some sound panels and everything like that makes us feel a little bit more legit. But, today I'm really excited about our guest because this is a distillery that, we've heard about, we've read about it before on Bourbon and Banter and everything like that. He's even been a guest with Fred Minnick on his show on YouTube before. And so now...
we have something in common.
Yeah.
Been there.
Yeah. Fred's the mutual connection here, right?
There we go.
And so being able to have him on the show, kind of talk about their story and stuff like that is, pretty exciting because for anybody that isn't watching on TV, he brought 2 fine whiskeys for us to sip on here. So we got their bourbon and their rye, which you might be hearing us sipping out throughout the show.
Yes, and it's very highly decorated bottle, so tons of awards. And I just had it for the first time, and I can see why. For a distillery this young, it seems like some pretty good juice you got here. So I'm excited to hear the story and dive into how it got to this bottle. So.
and see, do they put stickers on all these? Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and introduce our guest. So today we have Michael Meyers. Michael is the founding distiller and CEO of Distillery 291 out of Colorado Springs. So Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, good. So, before we, talk about the whiskey and the distillery, let's rewind the hands of time here. Kind of talk about your first introduction to bourbon or spirits or anything like that.
Yeah, so that's funny. The first time I drank whiskey that I remember was
we always have those stories too.
Yeah, I was 18 and just turned 18 that day and went to a local bar with a friend.
You must have been in Canada or something, right?
Close.
No, I'm kidding.
No, in Georgia. Back in the day, it was 18. That all changed. But I went to a bar and wanted to drink a whiskey and ordered Yukon Jack, which was sort of a whiskey at the time, sweet. And now it's really not. I mean, I think it's GNS with some natural flavorings and stuff. But
you would know better than I. I've
never heard of Yukon Jack. Yeah. It's a new one on me.
It's from Canada.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's funny that you said that.
Yeah,
and it's a liqueur.
Gotcha.
Now, and so with my friend Todd Hopkins, and we had a lot of fun and drank a shot of it and woohoo, and then
we did it.
And then probably the next time, I was drinking Jack Daniels as well later, and then college. One of my worst experiences was a Super Bowl, and I had bought some really nice Crown Royal, moving up in the world, and drank not a fifth, but maybe the 375 of that throughout the Super Bowl, and just got so sick. And actually woke up the next morning and was like, I love whiskey. I am going to the bar and forcing myself to drink more whiskey so that I don't have that issue where, I can't smell that ever again. And so I did. That day I got up that afternoon, went to the bar, and that first shot of whiskey was rough.
Oh, I could imagine. You didn't even like try to like get a Bloody Mary to like ease your way in.
Hair of the dog.
Nope, hair of the dog. And it was great. And now I make it.
Yeah, that's
one hell of a story.
I know.
That's like the most badass story I've ever heard.
There's no way that I remember back in college and stuff like that. There's no way I'd get up after feeling hungover after a bad night and be like,
I'm going for is Gatorade or something, like coconut water. I'm like, what can I do to feel better?
Back then everybody was drinking like Pedialyte. They would actually go and buy like children's Pedialyte.
I'm guilty of that.
There you go.
It doesn't work.
I think my time's way before Pedialyte.
Yeah, we're softies.
I was in
millennials.
Savannah, Georgia. They just kept drinking.
I was about to say, I was like, yeah, definitely a different time. We're searching for Pedialyte, and he's like, let's just bring another whiskey out for us.
Shoot it right now.
So let's kind of talk about more of like your history and stuff like that. So you were in Savannah. How long were you in Savannah?
So I was in Savannah for school. I'm born and raised Georgia, with my summers spent in California. My mom lived out there since I was 6. And so I went to...
Talk about two different ends of the spectrum, Georgia and California.
Really different, because we raised Tennessee walking horses. So
cool.
in middle school, we had 11 acres inside the perimeter, and then moved out to Alpharetta with 70 acres and another 80. So we had horses and cows and all kinds of stuff. And I was given a camera when I was 15. My mom gave it to me and picked it up and never looked back. And so I went to Savannah College of Art and Design. Believe it or not, that's where 291 comes from for me. So my dorm room was 291. And after I moved in there, I went to school and learned in history class that the very first photo gallery ever was Gallery 291, was in New York in 1907. And so I'm like, meant to be a photographer. Mm-hmm. And that's where 291 came from, which is my brand name.
And that those 3 numbers have stuck with you for forever.
Yeah, I was a fashion beauty photographer for over 27 years, and
so like for models or clothing lines.
Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, mainly makeup, beauty stuff,
like Revlon, Clairol.
Yeah, Estee Lauder.
I only know this because my wife's a cosmetologist.
Estee Lauder, Tiffany and Company. But I did shoot for This Old House and Forbes, FYI, and.
What kind of camera?
GQ Esquire.
The Leica or doing the Canon? What do you do?
No, I shot with a Pentax 6.7.
Pentax, yeah.
And it looks like a 35 millimeter that's on steroids, and so the negative is 6 millimeters by 7. So that's pretty big, almost a playing card, but a little smaller than that.
You guys are speaking a different language to me.
Yeah,
I've tried I've dabbled in a lot of things and photography was like one of them, and it lasted for like 2 months. And so I had a Leica though, but it's collecting dust. But
nice. Now
I'm just like iPhone, iPhone X.
Right. That's everybody asks. Do you still take
it's so
pictures?
Lazy, but
and I'm like, I have an iPhone. I mean, it's in my pocket, but it's all branded. I mean, it looks like a phone. I'll show it to you afterwards.
Yeah. I was about to say, because most people, I remember when I had my first kid and they said like, oh, you've got to go out, you've got to buy an awesome camera. And, here's your Canons, your DSLRs. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be lugging this thing around with me everywhere we go. I just don't know if I'm going to do it. But I remember I did look into it. I just never pulled the trigger on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good reason.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to shoot, you might need a better one. But for family stuff, it's always been best the camera in your hand or the camera in your pocket. because you'll get the image. It doesn't matter if it's high quality or not, but you at least have the moment.
Yeah.
And that's what matters.
I'm not
Problem always,
gonna
though,
make it a poster size.
When I was shooting, I would be so focused on like getting a shot that I would forget the moment, not being the moment. That's why I was like, I'll just do it with my iPhone. But
Right, exactly.
we're not here to talk about cameras. But
No.
But I want to hear a little bit more about the photography and because that seems like it was a pretty. I mean, for 20 years, as you said that you were doing that,
Over
right?
27, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of talk about. You've got to have at least some pretty funny stories or something good from those days too.
So I shot Angelina Jolie when she was 15.
wow.
I have that picture on my
For
phone
Gia.
as well.
Was that
Yeah.
the movie Gia?
And when she was 16, I shot her a couple of times. Some of my last clients were the Olsen twins. I shot them.
Yeah.
Shot them.
My
and
wife would
shot
be
their
like
line.
geeking out right now. She's like an Olsen twin fanatic.
Full house.
Yeah.
So I had a really great career. It was still a struggle. It was, a lot of work and living in New York. Not easy raising a family there and, being a freelancer.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was about to say, so like the dynamic of photography and freelancing versus making whiskey, like be honest, what's more enjoyable now?
making whiskey.
And how did you merge the two?
I built my still out of photogravure plates.
Okay.
So a photogravure plate is a flat copper plate. You chemically etch an image in. You put ink on the plate. You put a piece of paper with it, run it through a press, and you get an inked photograph. So I took those 7 copper plates of different images from my life and water jet cut them, took them and rolled them through a roller so they curve, and then had a guy TIG weld it together. And that was my original still, a 45-gallon still. I had a cask for the thump keg or doubler, and I built a stripping still out of a 55-gallon stainless drum. So
You built this all yourself?
I did.
How do you do that? Like YouTube or something? Like
Yes, I grew up on a farm. I can build stuff.
Okay.
I'm a redneck.
I hear you. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, my story's intertwined with New York and 9/11, and then building this still, and the process of distillation reminds me of the darkroom. So that's where 291 came from for the brand name for me. But I built that still, and that still is the thump keg to my 300-gallon still that I had built in Colorado Springs. So these guys, Department of Defense contractors, and they built things like titanium ball valves that's like 10 inches across for nuclear sub, valves and nickel plate press, not plate, but nickel press rings for propulsion tubes. And they're like, we like whiskey. Do you need a bigger still? And I'm like, yeah, great.
Sure.
And so gave them my plans, and they built a 300-gallon still that looks identical to mine. And the funny thing was, there's a little bit of pressure in a still, like 5 pounds, but not much. But they were engineers. I went to art school, and they didn't believe me that it didn't need to be that thick. So they built it out of plate copper. So it is thick and heavy, but it's beautiful. It works really well too.
So kind of talk about that, because you kind of intrigued me right there, because I remember reading a little bit something about 9/11 and that happening, and you couldn't get back to your apartment or something like that, and you kind of just had to move the family for a little bit. Kind of talk about that time.
Yeah, so 9/11, we lived 3 blocks from World Trade Center. We lived on the corner of Warren and West Side Highway, and I was on Greenwich and Duane with my son on my shoulders when the first plane flew over. My older son, so they were 4 and 5. My oldest son was in our building in PS 89, which is on the 2nd floor. We lived on the 25th floor, and we had just dropped him off. My wife and I and my son walk into his class or his school, and that's when the first plane flew over. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, saw everything that day. It was a crazy day, needless to say. Spent the night on North Moore, and then with 7 families, and then couldn't get back in our apartment, went to Long Island. Long story short, moved to Colorado for about 9 months. I commuted, moved back to New York, was there a couple of years, and it wasn't good for my family. So I said we'd move back.
You're still doing photography at this time?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Still doing photography. And so we moved back, and I commuted another 4 years full time, and then was just trying to figure out something else to do and still like wrote some television, worked on some movie stuff, and just nothing really panning out. And I shot a Vanity Fair job in New York in August 2010. And on the way home, read an article about the guy that created Sailor Jerry and Hendrick's Gin. Mm-hmm. And he, created an idea and branded it and all that. Somebody else made the juice for him. And I came back thinking, wow, I could brand a whiskey, and talked to a friend of mine, Mike Bristol Brewing. And he said, get your license and I'll try and help. And so, and then somebody else said, why don't you try and make it? Because you can always hire somebody if you can't. And I'm like, they make it in the woods of Georgia. It can't be that hard. And so I decided to build my still, moved into 300 square feet, got my DSP, distilled spirit plant permit in April. I got it in 4 weeks from when I applied, which is amazing time.
Dang, that's fast.
I was about to say, 'cause
Everybody takes us forever to get anything.
TTB doesn't move that fast anymore.
No.
And so I was in 300 square feet. I could make 60 gallons a month of finished whiskey. That was working my butt off. That was, 17-hour days, 7 days a week.
Wow. For
Talk about
60 gallons,
those first attempts at making whiskey. What's it like? What do you do going into? Like, are you reading a manual, or how? Are you just like going off like old travel knowledge, or what do you do?
He's got a landline to somebody with some overalls on. Be like, no, you got to tweak. You got to move this.
Yeah.
So I'd never brewed beer and I'd never distilled until I started this. And my first distillation, true finished distillation, was September 11th, 2011. My still, the guy TIG welding it together, finished it after it took him all summer to get started on it. Finished it September 9th. And so I waited for that to remake that anniversary. And during that time, I read, YouTube, blogged everything I could about how you make whiskey. And it is funny. The one thing that I do say is I watched Popcorn Sutton's documentary, the original one. And in there's a point where he talks about he takes a stick and the worms there, and he puts the stick in the end of it and lets it balance. And he says, if the whiskey is thicker than the stick coming off, it's fighting whiskey. So from that, I learned you need to run it really slow to make really good whiskey. And there's other things that I learned, books I read, things. And I love to cook and I love the darkroom. And so I really feel that was like my home brewing experience, putting those two things together to get to make whiskey. So
are there any other like outsiders or consultants that you leaned on to kind of pick their brains or kind of guide you along, or is it totally just you?
Totally me.
That's cool. How did you know you weren't going to like blow up the place or like, just, I don't know, there's a lot of pressure. Well, I know you said there's only like 5 pounds of pressure, but those things run hot. It seems like a lot of bad can happen.
I knew that it was an open system. So as long as you don't plug the system, you're good. And as long as you keep cooling the steam coming off the still, you're okay. But if that water stops, that can be a problem. Yeah, there was one point where that happened for me, and it was a mess. And I think there was a room full of 160 proof steam all wrapped around me, and I was just like, okay, let's calm down, slow this down.
Yeah.
And I read a lot. I paid attention to how it was supposed to work, and did it that way. The funny thing is I steam heated everything. So I put a steam coil in my mash tun that also was my stripping still with a different top on it and a column. And then my finished still had a steam coil in it. And I bought a home steam unit for a steam shower. And first time I hit the button, it came on. It was all hooked up.
I thought you were going to say like clothes from when you photograph people, like steaming clothes.
That's funny. And so I hit the button, went to take notes for a little bit. About an hour later, it turned off, went thump. And I'm like, what? Walked over there, looked at everything. It was hot, and pushed the button. It came back on. I'm like, great. Literally an hour later, it cut off again. And I was like, damn, it's a home steam unit. It's got an automatic off on it. So literally for the next 2.5 years, every run from finish run, stripping to mashing in, I had to reset that button every 45 minutes.
Oh gosh,
That's awesome.
it sounds terrible.
Oh, I know.
Terrible. So I'd run home, cook dinner.
But it's like the great bootstrapping story. Like somebody is just like going in and just giving it their all and like figuring it out. I don't know. It's pretty cool.
That's right. And I'd go home, cook dinner, come back, push the button, go home, eat dinner. I'd go to a liquor store, make a sale, come back, push the button, go back to another store.
Did you just have an alarm on your phone every 4 minutes? Reset steamer. Reset steamer.
I know 45 minutes pretty good now.
Somebody goes up, how long will it take there? 45 minutes. Don't worry, I got that. I mean, it is an impressive story of being able to go and learn and actually build it yourself. You know, it's like most of the people that, you know, you say like, oh, you want to write a book on something. Well, if you want to learn something, write the book on it or do whatever it is to actually learn how to do it from the inside out. And, you know, you could go to Moonshine U and you could learn and look and be able to like look at it. But I mean, you really like built the pieces that actually made this all together.
I did. And Moonshine U wasn't around at that time, and there wasn't a lot. It was mainly...
Would you have gone if it was, or would you just done it yourself?
That's an interesting question. I probably wouldn't have. So when I went to buy a still, that's why I built my own. Vendome had a 50-gallon still that was like $50,000. I'm like, I don't have that money. I've never made this stuff. What? So I decided to build my own. So probably the same with Moonshine U. Probably would have been expensive. I wasn't sure, you know.
Yeah.
So
and just wing it at your best.
Right.
I guess, and talk a little bit more about, because I think one thing that's interesting here was you were talking about your copper plates that you took, and then if I understood correctly, you said you rolled it out thin enough that you could then kind of form it and build your still.
So didn't roll it out. It was fairly thin copper. It is thin copper. I mean, it's rigid, but you roll it just to curve it, to put the curve in it. So that's why you roll it, not squeezing the copper out. But the etchings are still on the still. You can see them when you go and take a tour. Mm-hmm. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, I just researched it. Not everybody can TIG weld copper, and I found a man that was an amazing welder. Another DOD guy that could TIG weld copper and did a really nice job with it. So.
And talk about the design a little bit, because I know we've had Vendome on the show before, and you know they talk about all the crazy designs, and you go to anywhere, like, and you see the different still boxes, you see the different ways that people are putting it. I mean, it could be a spatial issue, it could be a bunch of different ways, but you know, unless you're doing a copper pot still, or it's a column still, but everybody's is a little bit different, a little bit unique. So kind of talk about how you came to the design of what yours was going to be.
So mine's a copper pot still. There's no plates in it at all. The only sort of plate is the thump keg, so that kind of works as what plates do in a still. And that design I found on the web. Somebody had built one, and I was like, "That's really cool." And I designed it more how I needed it. But the design of the still, there's a secret behind that. I figured it out. I'm a visual person, and I found a few stills that I liked and came up with a concept and an idea and what the sizes should be, and drew it out. Mm-hmm. So in high school, I had 11 quarters of mechanical drafting. So I'm not great at it now because that's a long time ago, but I can draw.
Is that like AutoCAD, or before it was AutoCAD?
Oh yeah, this is like pencil and paper.
Yeah.
With a T-square.
Yeah, exactly. With
maybe a compass.
Or
exactly.
Retractor.
Exactly. And that's what I did. I drew it out. I bought a drawing board, which is a piece of soft wood, thick, board, and I bought paper and drew it out. I still have those drawings of it. I actually drew a limbic still first, and it's a really beautiful drawing, but I never went that direction. I went with the pot still.
So how much? You said Vendome was $50,000. How much was your homemade still?
$3,500.
Wow, big cost savings.
Yeah. I sourced all the parts. I sourced all of it. That's not with my time in it or anything like that. But
sure.
Yeah.
Where'd you get all the parts? Like Craigslist or?
Pretty much. No, Granger, actually.
Oh, okay.
They have
I bought stuff from Granger.
They have a lot
They
of good
do.
parts on there.
They have more stuff than you'll ever know.
Yeah.
Like you're like, do you have this? And I'm like, yeah, duh. And I'm like, what? You all have that too?
So yeah.
Craigslist would have been a better story, though.
I know.
Right.
In search of, this. In search of a doubler.
Misconnection. Where's my doubler?
Yeah.
So I guess so we're talking right now about making your still and making White Dog and kind of talk about what was that next progression. So he's showing us the picture of it right now. So yeah, that's it's an exact replica of your original. It's really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool.
So making White Dog here at the very beginning. So were you thinking like, okay, like I'm gonna make whiskey, I'm gonna make bourbon, or was it just like what was the kind of like your end goal that you kind of had in mind?
So I set out 291 Colorado whiskey. I set out to make a Western whiskey, a whiskey that you would walk into a bar in a Western, ask for whiskey, walk up to the bartender.
What
and
defines a Western whiskey for you?
So mine is a Colorado whiskey, and it's big, bold, and beautiful, like the state of Colorado.
Okay.
So, and they'd slam the bottle down, and it'd be $2.91, and you get to drink it.
And then you have a duel afterwards.
Exactly. And so I love rye whiskey. Before I made my own, Thomas Handy was my favorite. So both these, my rye and my bourbon, are my original recipes. The bourbon has changed slightly. It's 80% corn, 19% malt rye, 1% malt barley. It started out 80-20 malt rye. And that's because Mike Bristol had a bag of corn, 50-pound bag of corn, and it was over a weekend and I wanted to mash in. So I went to the home brew shop and I was looking for rye. They only had rye and malt. I'm like, great, I need the malt to convert. So I did that, mashed in and ran that. I ran that on I stripped it and then ran it on a very small Olympic still. And that was truly my first distillation ever. And then the next distillation, and I have all these notes written down with the dates on it and everything.
Like
the next
captain's log.
Yeah,
day
well, you
one.
have to for the TTB. You have to log, And I didn't have any money. I wasn't doing any, computer stuff. So I was handwriting notes in the notebook, and they're funny to go through because I talk about what I'm doing distillation, but I also talk about my son's running cross country that day, or an event I was going to, or what was going on in my life throughout these days. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of cool to look back. It's all chicken scratch, scribbled, scratched out, spelling's wrong, all that good stuff.
We need to
translate the day like, why the fuck is this steamer resetting again?
What the hell is wrong with this mash?
Yeah.
Or, oh, that smells like throw up. That is not good.
Yeah. But that is cool because you can always look back on that and be like, this is where I started, and always kind of bring you back to that. That is awesome.
Yeah, and we go back to it. Actually, there's another mash in there that is a special release, comes out usually in October. It's called Bad Guy. And that was my third recipe. And we went back a couple of years ago because the newer Bad Guy wasn't tasting the same as the old Bad Guy, and so we went back and reread the recipe and the directions, and it was great to have
Bad
Guy. Bad Guy came from, so I did a single barrel for a restaurant, and I had done this mash to try. I hadn't experimented, so I was going to experiment. And Bad Guy's a 4-grain wheated bourbon, and when it came off the still, I was like, that is really good, White Dog. I mean, it was sweet, amazing. And I put it in a tank and was waiting, and was supposed to have already mashed in for this other one for the restaurant. And I got behind and I needed the cash. And so I was like, I got that one in the tank over there. I'll just sell it. So I called him, said, come hammer the bung. It's done. Poured it in there, hammered the bung. He was talking to his son on the phone, who was like 4. And he's like, what should I call it? And his son goes, Bad Guy. And I was like, oh, damn. And so he a year later, when the whiskey was coming out of the barrel, I'm like, what are we going to name it? And he goes, I don't know. And I had written on the barrel Bad Guy, so I didn't forget. And I was like, you got to call it Bad Guy. We got to call it Bad Guy. And he's like, no, I don't know. And then I talked him into it finally. And so that's why it's Bad Guy Bourbon, 291 Bad Guy Bourbon.
Very cool.
4-grain weeded bourbon.
You have a lot of cool stories.
Let's just sit back and listen.
I know. Just keep talking. I'll shut up.
I mean, kind of talk about that a little bit as you were, how much are you producing and what kind of, at that time, like what kind of barrels are you putting them in? Like kind of talk about that process too. With a career as a master distiller spanning almost 50 years, as well as a Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer and having over 100 million people taste his products, Steve Nally is a legend of bourbon who for years made Maker's mark with expertise and precision. His latest project is with Bardstown Bourbon Company, a state-of-the-art distillery in the heart of the bourbon capital of the world. They're known for their popular Fusion series. However, they're adding something new in 2020 with a release named The Prisoner. It starts as a 9-year-old Tennessee bourbon that is then finished in The Prisoner Wine Company's French oak barrels for 18 months. The good news is you don't have to wait till next year to try it. Steve and the team at Bardstown Bourbon Company have teamed up with Rack House Whiskey Club. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories that craft distilleries across the U.S. have to offer. Their December box features a full-size bottle of Bardstown's Fusion series and a 200 milliliter bottle of The Prisoner. There's also some cool merch inside, and as always, with this membership, shipping is free. Get your hands on some early release Bardstown bourbon by signing up at rackhousewhiskeyclub.com. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box. How much are you producing and what kind of, at that time, like what kind of barrels are you putting them in? Like kind of talk about that process too.
So the barrel mill, I found them online somehow, and they were fairly new out of Avon, Minnesota. And so I called them. They would FedEx me a barrel. So I'm like, that works. Everybody else wanted to sell you a pallet. I'm like, yeah, buy a pallet. There's a funny story about pallet too. And so I just bought a barrel and would fill it up. I had a few barrels in that 300 square foot space, and I'd harvest it and hand bottle it, hand label it, and go out and sell it.
So at the very beginning here, kind of talk about because I remember you said you were doing, would you say 50, 60 gallons in a week, right?
A month.
A month.
And that took, 6. So my fermentation tanks were 55 gallon Pepsi, plastic drums with the top cut off. And so it would take, I'd mash in 6. So I could do 2 mashes in a day. So that's 3 days. I could strip 2 in a day. So that's 3 days of stripping. And it would yield about 35, 40 gallons of low wines and at 35% or so. And then I'd finish run it, and it would, I'd end up with like 15 gallons. And so in a month period, I had 60 gallons to put in barrels. So
talk about it, like, cause we talked to big boys, right? And they're pumping out that in 20 minutes, right?
In a minute.
Yeah. and so kind of talk about, where did you kind of see yourself? Like, were you like, this is awesome. Like, this is fun. I'm having fun with this. Or were you like, I'm in over my head? Like, kind of talk about what was going through your mind at that time.
It was amazing. So when it first came off the still and I tasted it, and I had a friend that was a bartender, phenomenal bartender, Nate Wyndham, and he would taste it and he's like, damn, that's really good White Dog. And so he had a couple of cocktails that he was using, some White Dog that was on the shelf at the time. And he just started trading it out with my rye White Dog and my fresh. And I always say, if it came off and it had been a grind to figure out the recipe and it wasn't that good coming off, it would have been a lot harder. But when it was that good and Nate was already making cocktails with it, it was like, all right, this is working. And I could taste it and tell. And so, but I mean, the whole process, you've got to make those tail cuts, and that's the art of distillation. And I didn't know anything. And so that made me nervous. What are you going to do? How are you going to do this? And so, in my process as a photographer solving problems, the head cut is easy. It's a percentage, or you can taste the difference really quickly. It also drops in proof quite a bit, at head cut. And then you got ethanol coming off, and then tail, it's like, where do you stop as a distiller, the art of distilling? Where do you stop? And so when it started dropping in proof, I decided to take, a quart mason jar and collect it every 10 proof, and then go back. I had the main amount of the ethanol, but here I had tails coming off, and I just started tasting them and deciding how much I would put back into, the ethanol that had already come off.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I figured out my cut.
Yeah.
And
well, you got to make sure you figure out the cuts, because won't that shit make you go blind if you get it wrong? I mean,
that's the head cut.
there you go. Okay.
That's acetone, methanol, and all that. That comes off first. Those are high alcohols that have a low boiling point.
Mm-hmm.
So were you cash flowing this with your photographing? What the
You've only had one pour, right?
I know. I'm
Get it
trying
out.
to spit it out.
Get it out.
Your
Photography
career, was it paying for your? Gosh, why can't I say that? Photography career.
I just did it.
I know. It's this
Photography
Western
career.
whiskey, man. I'm not used to it. No, I'm kidding. So was your photography career, was this kind of fueling this baby, or were you just like out on your own trying to make this work?
No, my photography was not. I did do a design job for a charity. They were trying to save the hospital from being sold to a large corporation. And so they had this whole campaign they wanted. And so I designed and did commercials and did all kinds of stuff for it. So it paid me really well. So I used that money to start 291.
Gotcha.
And to go back to the original distillation and all that, when I started making 291, I wanted it to be Colorado and kind of branded. And so we haven't talked about that, but it's 291 Colorado Bourbon or 291 Colorado Rye Whiskey, and it's aspen stave finished. So I take toasted pieces of aspen, pop the bung on the barrel, put the aspen in the oak barrel, and for the last few weeks, we finish it on aspen.
Aspens are the trees that they turn yellow, but they don't lose their leaves. Is that right?
No, they lose their
Or they
leaves.
do lose their leaves.
Yeah.
Okay.
They turn yellow and red. They're really beautiful.
Yeah.
And the bark's white.
The only Aspen reference I know is going to be the Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's like Aspen. So
Talking about a city called Aspen.
So the way I figured that out was I wanted aspen on the label. I took some aspen, toasted it, put it in a mason jar with some finish whiskey, and was riding to Boulder with a friend that was about a 2-hour drive. And I just shook the mason jar. And when I got up to Boulder, I had some of the original and then what it tasted like on aspen. And I'm like, that's good. And so that's where that came from.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. What is it about aspen that's different from oak that kind of gives it some different?
It's there. So for me, it pushes caramel notes to maple, and it adds a little spice to it and a little smoke.
This rye has a beautiful color on it, by the way, too.
I need to try the rye.
Yeah, pour yourself some of the rye. The nose on the rye is really good. I love it.
So it's 101.7 proof.
Mm-hmm.
The bourbon was 100 proof.
And how long are you aging these, and what type, and how big are the containers, and everything
wow.
like that?
That is a good nose.
Let's get into it for the
That's all a
whiskey geeks out
secret.
there. It's all a secret.
Yep.
Oh gosh.
Oh, man.
Guess we got to go on a tour to find
Yeah,
out.
there you go. So it's American oak barrels, deep charred.
Mhm.
We age a year to 2 years right now. The rye that you're talking about in 2018 won World's Best Rye from Whiskey Magazine. It also won America's Best in 2016 from World Whiskey Magazine. And then that's an interesting thing that in that 300 square foot space, my barrel number 2 of this rye got 94 points from Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have 7 liquid golds from Jim Murray with 6 different recipes.
Mhm.
So it's been...
So Jim Murray's a fan of you.
Yeah, I'm a fan of his. He's great. His tasting notes are amazing. I don't know if you've ever read any of them.
We haven't had him on the show yet. We'll get him on. We'll get him
They're
on.
probably much more elaborate than ours. I'm like, tastes like s'mores or
They're really colorful.
or I always try to relate them to a breakfast cereal, like Cocoa Crisp or Count Chocula.
I just noticed that you do a lot of cereals, don't you?
I know I get a lot of cereal. Like when you're a kid, you get a lot of those cereal notes with it, with the milk.
One of our bourbons has a it's HR or high rye. It has a cherry fun dip
Oh, wow.
to it.
Fun dip.
It's this.
I'm gonna use that one now.
Fun dips, that powdery.
My kids just
so
got
it's like
that this
dry,
weekend.
and so the high proof of it it's cherry, but it dries out just like fun dip. It's really funny. So there, you can find my distiller Eric Jett had one whiskey, and he's like, it's like that dusty old poncho, and the team was like, "What are you talking about?" And
What were you on at that time?
it's like your grandma's attic. There is a note sometimes of dryness.
Yeah.
The
musty old basement.
gets musty old isn't good, but dusty's not so bad because it's the dryness part.
I have tasted like you talk about cherry fun dip, like grape Kool-Aids, like
Right.
the manufactured grape flavors. Like I get that
they come out a
sometimes.
lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Talk about today's operation. So you're the founding distiller. Sounds like you're not distilling anymore, but kind of talk a little bit more about what the size of the operation is, the people. If you're still doing 60 gallons in a month, or if you've progressed. So kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be here if I didn't progress.
We got the only bottles from this.
Exactly. Well, that was the interesting thing. Was like 2016 when I sent Whiskey Magazine. They needed 2 bottles, and I had to pay money, and I was like, I don't have that much whiskey, so that's why it took me a while to start putting in awards. But all my tanks, the 55-gallon drums, the fermentation tanks, my stripping still, 55-gallon drums, have all moved up to 1,500 gallons, including the stripping still. I showed you that picture. It has the 300-gallon finished still in it. All the whiskey still goes across the original still as the thump keg. We distill twice a week, and we're producing about 240 finished gallons a week right now. We're working on some barrel financing at the first of the year that we'll move up to producing 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. And we are, right now, I've been in 7,500 square feet for 6 years. Wow, that's hard to believe. And we are moving, within a year, we will be in a campus with 28,000 square feet, probably 4 different buildings. Mm-hmm. One will be a distillation building. The other one will be fermentation, barrel storage, and then tasting room.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking at let's keep investing into this, growing it bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. We did 2,609 liter cases last year, sold, and we've produced the year before 2,609 liter cases. Mm-hmm. So we're selling everything we make. 95% of it is in Colorado. We just opened Kentucky this week. We're in 27 Kroger stores in Kentucky, and it's going really well. But we could sell more if we had it, and that's what we're working on. But we still, the quality, it does not come out of the barrel until it's ready.
What's it like coming to Kentucky? Is it like coming to Kentucky to play basketball? Like we got to face the Wildcats when you're coming to Kentucky, and face all the big boys in Bourbon. Is that daunting, or are you like, bring it on?
I don't know that it's daunting. The community's amazing, and that's the great thing. Everybody I meet is incredibly helpful. Even Fred Minnick, he's the one that helped Kroger. So by introducing me to the buyer, and
now that I think about it, this rye tasted very familiar, and I had it at Fred's office. He goes, "This is the next big distillery."
Oh, nice!
Because the smokiness of it reminds me of when I had it. So anyway, side note.
Yeah. So it's been amazing. At the one of the awards thing, Jeff Arnett won Master Distiller, Jack Daniel's Master Distiller. And I went up and talked to him because you want to say hello, right. Oh my God. And he was the nicest man, and we got talking, and he's from Jackson, Tennessee, where my brother lives, that's a surgeon. And we had a family farm in Shelbyville, which Flat Creek, Tennessee, which was 7 miles from Jack Daniel's, 7 miles to Dickel. So I told him that, and we really hit it off. And then my brother was doing a charity, didn't know I had met Jeff, but knew he was from Jackson, and reached out to him to do a tasting at the charity. And because he was from Jackson, he did it. And my brother called me and said, that's who's coming. And I was like, oh, I just met him. And he's like, wow. And so I went with my brother's friend, our partner that had a twin prop plane. And we flew from Jackson to Tullahoma and picked up Jeff. And literally when I walked off the plane, he was walking up on the tarmac and he's like, hey, Michael, how's it going? And I mean, I'd met him once in person, but he knew who I was and it was amazing. And we've become friends. I text him all the time. I'm going to go see him tomorrow. The first time I went to Jack, he, shortly after that charity, he said, come down, I'll show you around. And he put me in his personal truck and he said, what do you want to see? He said, whatever you want to see, I'll show you anything. And that's amazing. I mean, and
there's got to be respect because Jeff's had everything. He's awesome master, but you got a company like Jack Daniels, you have every resource imaginable to you, whereas you kind of had no resources and made it work. So there's got to be something that you both can learn from each other.
Yes, and he's alluded to that, and is very respectful that I make a Colorado whiskey, and that's the thing. I love Kentucky bourbon, I love Tennessee whiskey, I love all kinds of Scotch, Irish whiskey, but I'm not looking to make a Kentucky bourbon in Colorado. My bourbon, my whiskey, my rye are to be different, big, bold, beautiful.
Big, beautiful. Yep.
My brand, there's a few names, but one's rugged, refined, rebellious. We also hard made the Colorado way. And then another tagline is, ride it like you stole it, drink it like you own it.
Nice.
I like it.
And
Nice.
so, that's what I set out to do this. And it's been amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think it's had a pretty warm reception, right? And congratulations for coming to Kentucky. It's a big step,
It's no
especially.
small feat.
No, it's definitely, and not only that is talking to you about the progression of where it is or where it was to what it is today. Everything comes with growing pains too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So kind of talk about, at least, did you have a specific time of growing here that you're like, okay, like.
I wish it was just me and the 60 gallons.
So the one thing about being a photographer, consistently, you have to build teams of people, especially doing fashion. So hair, makeup, stylist, model, all that kind of stuff, location. That was helpful for me in growing this and finding people that could help me grow it. So I have a team of about 13 people right now. It's an amazing team. They do phenomenal work. But yeah, there were times, and there's still times, I'm bootstrapping it. So there's tight times with money. There's tight times with barrels not being ordered, panic, bottle panic, things like that. When I first started, that was something I wanted to mention earlier about a pallet. To get not this bottle, but my original bottle, which is similar to this, but this one came along when I could buy 30,000, or promise I'd buy 30,000 bottles.
Yeah.
Promised.
But this one I could buy a pallet of. And my mom had given me a Cougaran at some point, and Cougaran is an ounce of gold. And
Thank you for explaining that, because I was about to say I have no idea what you're talking about.
yeah, it's a South African coin. And so I was making whiskey in that 300 gallon. I needed a bottle. They give me a better price if I bought a pallet, or to buy the bottle, I had to buy a pallet. And gold was up expensive then. And I literally took that Cougaran, cashed it in, and bought a pallet of bottles. Mm-hmm. And was able to put them in that 300 square foot space. I built shelves and made it where, they weren't really in the way. And it was kind of crazy. But so there are growing pains. I mean, the most nervous I've been that I can remember is working on this move for this, 28,000 square feet. It's big. We won't renovate it and build it out beautiful with 4 production line facility. We're going to move in with what we have now and grow it like I did from the 300 to the 7,500 square foot. That worked really well. But we have our model is a ramp. I mean, it's a steep curve. And so we have a lot to get done in the next 4 years with making whiskey. And, there are growing pains. It is not easy. There hasn't been a day where I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to the distillery. I give up. I'm done, from day one to now. That's never crossed my mind.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. At least it means you're loving it.
Yeah.
I guess that you don't have to think of the Olsen twins. They still need me, right?
Yeah, that's a funny thing. I broke out a box of Polaroids. So back in the day, before digital, you were doing light tests and stuff. You used a Polaroid back on the camera. So you would take the picture, strobes go off, and you pull the Polaroid, wait a minute, and like pushing that button every 40, and you'd peel it and you'd look at light. So I kept most of those Polaroids. I've got boxes of them. And I opened one up the other day, and there's some just really beautiful pictures in it. Showed it to a friend, and they were like, "Oh my God, you got to start shooting again." I'm like, I don't know that that's happening, but I did reach out to a hairdresser friend and a couple of them at that time with the Polaroids, and posted on Instagram with it, and hadn't talked to them in years, 10 years, and they're like, "What's up?" And it was really great. Makes me want to maybe try one day, and who knows, but not.
You should
not
have
at
like
the
a
moment.
reunion at the distillery with like all your.
That's a great idea.
All your photography clients. Steeler got photography clients, and bring them to your distillery. Like, look what I'm doing now. Let's party.
Let's party. There we go. Well, at least you can get bottle shots done on the cheap, right? You can do those.
That's a funny thing. I don't shoot my bottles.
Really, you don't?
I don't.
Well, can you do ours while you're here?
I shoot them with the iPhone for like in situation, but to set them up and shoot them, I mean, I can do it, no problem. But I'm a little too close to the product, and also it's a different frame of mind. And to get in that frame of mind, it would take me a few days or a week working with the bottles and stuff to get the light, and it's just easier for me to pick somebody and go, I like his pictures, and I can direct what I want from there. And so that,
you coming from the photography background, and we're all kind of like doing a lot of stuff with whiskey, and I remember I talked to somebody about doing bottle photography, and I'm like, you charge what? Like to take a picture of a bottle? I mean, it's something that I had no idea even existed before then. So it's really cool that you kind of you can blend a lot of these worlds together, and you know how to direct and stuff like that. Because I'd be like, I don't know, a river in the background. Like, you tell me what looks cool.
Yeah. And I have a business partner in New York, or we were in a retouching company, Russ Gunlack, and he still retouches. He's an amazing retoucher. And so I send him stuff all the time. I mean, funny things, but I send him bottle shots, and I can direct him, and I can take a bottle, if it was shot in the same light, and have him put it like 5 bottles in one picture very easily and stuff like that. So I understand how to do that. So that's where I can direct it and get it done on the cheap. I mean, everybody else, that would cost them a ton of money. But we were at a tasting, and there was an airplane behind me, and it had a call sign number on the side of it. It's old, World War II type plane with that block number. And I took a iPhone picture of it and sent it to Russ, texted it to him, and said, "Can you change that to 291?" And literally 30 minutes later, it came back to me on my phone, and it was perfect. And I'm like, "Yep, there you go."
Awesome.
And posted it, and people were like, "How 291?" And I also did it this summer on a bull, the brand on a bull. It was like 301, and I asked him to do 291 on it, and they're like, "I didn't see that bull with that brand on it." It's really funny.
Yeah, it's good to know people, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So I guess kind of last question before we start wrapping this up is, you said 95% in Colorado, you're growing to Kentucky. I'm sure that you've got plans to even go beyond there. Kind of talk about, one last thing that you want to kind of leave listeners with as they are, they're walking the store, they see your bottle, and maybe they hear this. Like, what's one thing you want to leave them with?
I want them to enjoy my whiskey. There's a funny thing. I drink my whiskey neat. It's rare I drink it on the rocks, but I also in the summer, or when I feel like it, I drink my bourbon with Mountain Dew. I drink it my rye with lemonade. It makes
the only person I know that does that's my dad.
It makes it's an amazing drink, and it's a nice drink, summer drink.
Yeah.
And I want to drink bourbon. I also drink. I don't drink vodka Bloody Marys. I drink rye Bloody Marys, and those are phenomenal. But I want somebody to try my whiskey. I want it to take them back to Western days and enjoy it. And it's an unapologetic whiskey. It's a big, bold whiskey, and I'm really proud of it. The other thing that we didn't talk about is the cage that's on there. So when I was young, there was the cork and cage. The cage holds the cork in. When I was young, I'd watch TBS in the morning. And Saturday morning it had cartoons, and then if it rained, the later it got, old movies would come on. And there was an old movie where they were transporting nitroglycerin in a wagon, and they had wired all the bottles in so it wouldn't bounce. And when I started making high proof whiskey, I'm like, we got to wire the cork on. And so that's where that cage comes from.
Gotcha.
Now
we know.
there's a story to everything. I
There
love
really
it.
is.
There is. Even my watch.
Yeah.
My watch is my dad's watch. And every time I shake it down, it reminds me of him.
Yeah.
Real cool.
Very cool.
Well, Michael, thank you again for coming over here, coming on the show, and of course sharing your whiskey with us. I think it's an incredible story of what you've built and the team that's building this, and the direction it's going as well. I think everybody's pretty excited for really the future of what this is going to entail for y'all.
Thank you. Same here, Kenny and Ryan. I'm very appreciated to be on the show, and that's, we have an experimental batch called the E. We love to experiment. I love making my whiskey. I love selling it. I love giving it away to people to try it, tastings, and even people I meet, give them a bottle because they'll share it. And I love that. Yeah. So I really appreciate today. Thank you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming. It was a true inspiration. I mean, most companies we have on here, even if they're new, they go out and get big time investments or, get a lot of cash flow to back them up. And like to hear somebody just go source parts from Craigslist. No, I'm kidding. But just
Pretty
putting,
close.
just wanting to do something and find a way to like make it happen is like, it's so inspiring to me. I think it's a very cool story, and I'm excited for the brand. The rye is awesome.
I love it.
Really good.
Thank you.
Like,
Thank
so
you so
good.
much.
But it was a pleasure talking to you and hearing all your stories. I'm
For sure.
glad to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And so make sure you follow Distillery 291 on all the social medias. Give a shout out as well as your address where people can go and visit.
1647 South Tejon Street, Colorado Springs, Colorado. And our website is 291coloradowhiskey.com or distillery291.com.
There we go.
There we go.
Perfect. So make sure you follow them, follow us, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you like the show, want to support the show, help us on patreon.com. And if you like it and you don't want to help support on Patreon, just write a review. We love reviews. We like hearing from everybody else as well. So Ryan, go ahead and close it out for us.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks, Mike, for coming. Appreciate all the whiskey and all the fun stories. But yeah, if you have any show suggestions, feedback, we love hearing from our listeners because this is who we do it for. And we want to bring you content that you actually want to hear. And so, hit us up and let us know what you want to hear. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers.